Miss Chicago, ICN, Family Support Services, CAMP, American Pakistan Foundation, AMHP, UIC MSA, Open Chicago, Mecca Center, Youth of MCC, Ill Muslims, Arab American Family Services, HeartSpeak Institute, and the Mosque Community Nurses of Chicagoland. Awesome. So this is our agenda for today. So tonight we'll be covering a few guidelines and housekeeping. Then we'll move into a presentation about the topic that's being covered. Then we'll hop into a panel discussion with scenarios and an integrated Q&A as we go along. Our panelists will introduce themselves a little later on, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them down below via the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer them during the panel discussion, inshallah. So a quick safety reminder. I know everyone may be a little sick of hearing about all the safety precautions revolving around COVID-19, but we want to reiterate, as we're living in such a fragile time, please remember to wash your hands, cough into your elbow, don't touch your face, keep a safe distance from one another, and please stay at home as much as possible. Again, these are all recommendations given from WHO or the World Health Organization. So inshallah, I'll be moderating tonight's discussion. In respect to everyone speaking, everyone else in this call is muted. So if you guys have any comments or questions, I highly recommend throwing it in the Q&A tab or chat so it could be answered sometime tonight. All questions will be asked anonymously, and near the end, we'll be sharing details about the CARE Coalition form, which can be used for those requesting expert assistance. If you're in immediate danger or have an emergency, please dial 911. Now let's hop into the presentation for tonight. So inshallah, outside of the immediate physical illness itself, COVID-19 has had a large impact on our families and relationships with people. This could be something as simple as self-isolation, leading to anxiety, or something as severe as a layoff from a job and scrambling for income. These all have their own consequences. Mental health is especially important when it comes to families and relationships. Poor mental health impacts the people that you're closest to, directly or indirectly. This can include your spouse and your children. We've seen 80% of patients classify their mental health as having a detrimental effect on their families. Stress levels, stress reactions, and emotional health can lead to emotional distress, breakups, and domestic violence. So let's take a look at the numbers behind it all. While these numbers may not seem linked at first glance, it's important to consider them all in the same breath. As people lose their jobs, family dynamics become increasingly stressful. Those already dealing with issues such as domestic violence may find their problems amplified during this time. Here we see, as mentioned earlier, how things can get worse for people with mental health issues and family problems. 16.8 million people have lost their jobs, and over 14,000 people have died in the US from COVID-19, and that number is just growing. The effect that this has on mental wellness of the country as a whole is a big deal. This graphic right here can show some of the different phases or zones that we may go through during the crisis. It's important to be mindful of each one and to use our fear to eventually learn and grow from the situation. We always want to reiterate that you're not alone. Millions of people are dealing with the effects of coronavirus, as well as mental health issues in general. Remember, it is okay to not be okay, and it is never wrong to ask for help. That being said, here are some resources that are available in our community with their respective organizations and websites. These range from counseling services to direct helplines and peer-to-peer youth hotlines. I'll give everyone a moment to go ahead and take a picture of this slide before moving on. We'll also be emailing our guests with this slide right after the webinar is over. From all of us at Project Taqwa and the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition and our partners, we want everyone to look after their mental well-being during this time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay sane. So we'll now go ahead and be transitioning into the panel discussion for today. The panel is going to consist of 6 scenarios with insight given from our panelists. We encourage you to ask questions or for clarification using the chat and Q&A features down below. So tonight's panelists will now be introducing themselves. Edmund, could we go ahead and start with you?
Sure, assalamu alaikum. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to thank, first of all, Project Taqwa for organizing this and doing most of the work that is this great presentation. So again, kudos to all the people who work on this and all the organizations that have supported it. So my name is Edmund Arroyo. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm the founder of the HeartSpeak Institute, which is an agency, is organization, counseling organization in the western suburbs of Chicago, where I do primarily marriage counseling, but I do a lot of adult individual counseling as well. Kind of specialize in working with immigrant families, Muslim, Indian, Pakistani, Arab, then minorities in general. I think people really appreciate when someone understands the culture in which they're having their struggles and how it contributes or can support them through their tough times. I'm also a school social worker at Hinsdale South High School, which is a high school in the western suburbs as well. I do a lot of, sponsor a lot of clubs there, drug and alcohol prevention, leadership club that I sponsor, and a cultural celebration club as well, and then obviously the MSA, the Muslim Student Organization. And work primarily with teenagers there, doing a lot of individual counseling with teenagers and group counseling. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Edmund. Sahar, can you go next?
Assalamualaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And I second my voice to Edmund. Thank you, Project Taqwa, so much for really holding the space for everyone, including ourselves. I think often as professionals, we ourselves need to indulge in this form of community, if you will. So a little bit about myself. I'm a mental health counselor. I work at Arab American Family Services. Arab American Family Services is a nonprofit social service agency. And really the mission and vision of AAFS is to uplift and empower the voices of our community, both serving minority marginalized populations, as well as mainstream. And it's led by two strong Palestinian women, Atadal Shalabi and Nariman Taha, along with a phenomenal group of staff who serve the community in terms of issues related to domestic violence. We have programs in sexual assault, ESL, immigration, an elderly program, civic engagement. And so we're serving the community in an array of areas. And speaking of this project that we are a part of today, I think it's really important to be able to ask community for the things you need. And so as panelists, we want to let you know that we're here for you. And in regards to the organization that I'm representing today, if you guys have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to let us know in the chat. And we are in a very difficult, unprecedented times. I mean, the reality is from a mental health perspective, this is a trauma. And so I hope you all today can be able to, at least if one thing, take away how to better take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, and to practice self-compassion. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Subhaan?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Subhaan Ashrafi. I'm the communications coordinator for the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. I'm also the marketing director for VPeer, an epic mentorship platform that helps build strong virtual communities. And I also run a YouTube channel that's all about sports and video games. I've been doing that for several years, and I've built an audience of a lot of youth and young professionals. And today I'd love to just share a lot of my experiences, hearing them out, talking about them, talking with them, and hearing a little bit about their struggles. I'm humbled to be here, and I'm also humbled to benefit from all the panelists we have today.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for all of that. So we're going to go ahead and hop into the first scenario that we have for this evening. So here's scenario one. My husband has dealt with the depression long before we were married. He had just finally started seeing a therapist a month and a half ago. I try to support him as best as I can, but during the coronavirus crisis, he has not been getting help for his mental illness. He also does not have the avenue to spend time with his close friends or go to the gym, which are things that helped him in the past. What can we do? Edmund, let's go ahead and start with you for this one.
So I think one of the things that everybody should know right now is that there was a lot of pressure put on by the mental health experts in the country, a lot of pressure put on insurance companies to make sure that they will approve teletherapy. So therapy online. So in my practice, I have another therapist that works with me. There are several therapists in my office space, and nobody's in the office right now, but they're all still practicing. And I have a higher demand than usual of people needing to see someone. And so you should know that, look into your insurance company and find out how you can pursue teletherapy with a local therapist and from the comfort of your home I've had people talking from their cars, from their bedroom, from their office, wherever. So it's really important that people know that and you access that. The other thing is that one of the challenges that we all need to take into consideration is that all of these coping mechanisms or stress management tools that we've all developed in our lifetime, whether we're an 18-year-old and developed in the past few years, or we're 50 and we developed over 30 years to help manage our stress, a big portion of them were taken away from us through this crisis. And so people are stuck there with still a lot of that stress and sometimes more, and they're not sure what to do with it. So it's really forcing us to, one, recognize that yes, we're all stressed out because we don't know what to do. We can't go work out at the gym. We can't go hang out with our friends at the coffee shop. We can't go on vacation. All those things we did to de-stress. So it really takes a time for us now. It's a time for us to be creative and try to figure out how can I, within the walls of my house, or even just going outside, but while keeping social distance, find new ways or other ways or revisit ways to help me manage this stress. And it's got to be a team effort. And I'm going to refer to this a lot. As our families, we got to come together and say, like, okay, what can we do for each other? What do you need to do? Because for all of us, it's different. Husband and wife, the way we manage stress is different. So really supporting each other in that, trying to brainstorm.
Definitely. That's awesome. Sahar?
Yeah, I want to note that depression can be very debilitating for a lot of folks. And then the reality is not everybody has access to mental health services. We already know, and for those that don't, there's a disparity in mental health services within the marginalized and minority communities. And so my organization, AFS, actually offers free mental health counseling, and we are currently working from home. So we do offer telehealth counseling through Zoom and phone sessions. And so I think the most important takeaway from this scenario is intervention. So the earlier one intervenes, the better work that we can do as clinicians. And you don't necessarily have to be a clinician to support someone. And I want to stress that not everybody has those family ties. So you can have chosen family, you could have a friend, you could have a community. And so I think it's important for a community to reach out to folks and let them know that we are here for you, we support you, and to dismantle all these stigmas related to depression, like this case scenario is showing, which in many ethnic minority communities, counseling is often still a taboo that we're working to destigmatize, and to let folks know that it's okay to talk about you not feeling well, feeling lethargic, feeling like you're, not wanting to associate with anybody. And in many capacities, I think we've all in one way or another felt not like ourselves, or we've had something very traumatic happen to us. And so it's important to be able to honor one's narrative and to get them the help that they want and meet them where they're at. And that's something that I also want to stress, is to meet folks where they're at.
Definitely. Subhaan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so just to piggyback on what everyone was saying, I think number one, if there are options, as Edmund was saying, to get online therapy, I definitely think that's something that should be explored, inshallah. But in regards to the second portion, where we have all these avenues, and I would call it my personal therapy, I would call basketball my therapy prior to COVID, and we have all these things that we can't do anymore. Very relatable. And I see a lot of people coming to me, hey, I used to do this, I can't do it. I used to go to the gym, I can't do it. What do I do now? So I would suggest, especially from a young couple's perspective, if you see your spouse not doing some of the hobbies that they used to do, it'd be very, very important to, number one, encourage them to have some time for themselves. But at the same time, when giving them time for themselves, encourage them to use that time well. So encouragement, in my opinion, is a huge one. Right? So basketball, like I said, was my therapy. And it wasn't until my wife started to encourage me, hey, I know you can't go to the gym anymore and work out or play basketball, but you can still go outside and dribble the ball. You can still go to a park by yourself and maybe shoot around. So be innovative and try to find ways to do things in a similar fashion to how you used to do it. If you like to work out, you can work out from home. There's so many YouTube videos. So definitely try to find ways to do some of those things you used to do. And if you're a spouse, noticing your spouse is not doing some of those things, encouraging them to do it and find fun ways for them to do it.
Definitely. From a family perspective myself, even though I'm not married or anything, I live in a household with 5 other people. So the gym used to be my way of being isolated and kind of having my own alone time. And now I find that differently when I go out for a walk or something, just get some fresh air to be away from everything or go for a drive. So I really relate to that, Subhaan. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for scenario one. Those are some amazing insights. So we'll go ahead and hop into scenario two. Actually, real quick, we have a graphic. So this graphic we meant to put up as you guys were talking. We have the fear zone, learning zone, and growth zone, as we talked about earlier during the presentation. These are great methods to break down stresses during COVID-19. So scenario two. So every week for the past few months, my wife and I have gotten into small arguments that turn into giant issues. We always say we forgive each other, but each time a new issue comes up, we bring up old ones. During this quarantine, it has only become worse. I'm afraid we will get sick of each other. So, Subhaan, let's go ahead and start with you for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I just got married, alhamdulillah, 2 years ago. And I would say that during COVID, I've never spent this much time every single day with my wife. And it's natural for whispers to come sometimes to find a fault or something in your spouse or just the family you're living with as well. When this happens, I think it's really important to engage in communication. Communication is so important in marriage, in a relationship with friends, with family. And if communication is done during something like this, when there's an argument or something like that, it's a good opportunity to hash things out. I think in regards to I'm afraid we'll get sick of each other, that's definitely something that's natural that some may feel. But there's a difference between, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're spending so much time together. There's a difference between spending all that time and then spending quality time. So I think if you are a young couple, it's very, very important, although you're with your spouse every single day at home during COVID, to make an intention and actually make separate time to have that quality time, whether it's a date night, you're playing games with each other, you're watching a movie, actually making that intention to have that quality time. And I really feel like that'll kind of give that, before COVID experience, like you're with each other, you're spending that quality time, and hopefully, inshallah, it'll make a huge difference.
Definitely for that. Sahar?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a scenario that I've seen often in our organization with clients and families. The reality is with quarantining, isolation can be a very scary thing. It can be very triggering to many folks because especially to folks who are so used to being social or just are high functioning. I myself am high functioning, so it can definitely be triggering. However, from a couple's perspective, any type of relationship, I think that on the contrary, this can be a really great opportunity to really dive into maybe some things like emotionally. Often there's an inner conflict with couples. And so little arguments there's something underlying to them. And then what is that underlying discomfort? Was it something that originally happened before that was really never worked through? And so we see little arguments because, if you're not seeing your spouse, say 24 hours of the day, and now you are, these little things that went unresolved are now coming up, if you will. And so I think the best way is what Subhaan had said, is to truly just communication is key. And to communicate through the discomfort. And that's the important part as well. Often, it's not always going to be roses and jokes and Titanic movies. While that's all lovely, the reality is we are going to face some conflict with the ones that we love. And so the way to approach it, I think, from a healthy manner, of course, is to be able to, with respect and open communication, transparency, be transparent with your significant other. And any partner in your life, is just be transparent, be open, be honest about the things that you're uncomfortable with. Because here's the thing, I mean, we cannot assume that the person in front of us is a mind reader, is a shrink, can read our minds. And so if you're not communicating that something's bothering you or something's hurting you, it can cause a lot of damage. And so just be open and never belittle your inner child, never belittle things that are bothering you and thinking that, I'm just going to push it under the rug because it sounds petty or it's small. In reality, if it's bothering you, it's significant. So just stay open, have open communication, be transparent. So definitely voicing a lot of my thoughts to what Subhaan touched on. Thank you.
Cool, definitely. Edmund, any thoughts?
Yeah, I really like what I was saying about, talking through the discomfort and just kind of to clarify for everybody what she means by that is that so often when a topic makes us uncomfortable to talk about it, we just will ignore it, or we'll kind of beat around the bush and not really, because we don't like being uncomfortable, and we feel like we might cry if we say it, or might get a little bit angry, and so we just shut it off. We don't say anything. So then what happens is that comes out later when there is a disagreement. And one of the things that I would say is that, as couples, we all can communicate about the latest numbers on COVID or the weather or these kind of things at work, but can you communicate about the things you disagree on? So if my spouse is saying something that I disagree with, can I keep listening? That's really the key. Like, can you keep listening and not just rush to respond back to what they're saying? And so if you can become a better listener, this is what happens in this scenario exactly. The person feels like they're not being heard, so they feel like they have to pile other things on in order for them to make a case, because you're just rebutting with everything they say. And so so they just feel like they have to build a case then, like in court, like here, there's this and this and this and this. And then you feel like all these old things have come up. But if they feel like you've legitimized and showed some empathy and understood what they were experiencing, they're more likely to just stick to that issue and feel heard. And sometimes you'll be surprised. They come off with a little bit of anger and they calm as they go through the conversation.
Definitely. Awesome insights there from all three of you. Thank you so much. Cool. So scenario number 3. Since this virus has really gotten bad, things have gone downhill in my marriage. My husband lost his job, making our relationship even rockier. Every time we have financial troubles, things go south. I really love him, but I feel as though he takes his frustrations out on me. He has slapped me and thrown things on several occasions. I do not believe this is his true self. No matter how many times it happens, what do I do? Anyone feel inclined to take this?
I can chime in and say that never should we condone anger or frustrations to result in physical violence. And that's something that I think this pandemic has really brought to light. There's been an increase in intimate partner violence. And we've seen an unfortunate influx in that within our communities. And so I think at the end of the day, this does really tie in with the previous scenarios to have that open communication. Unfortunately, health disparities and very capitalistic systems and society really hurt families. And so I could totally imagine the frustration and completely empathize with the client who's, especially with a family, if you lost your job, it's something that's very, very sad and a hard time. And there's stressors and high emotion involved with how you're going to support your family. Where's the next meal going to come from? And so I think it's important to always have it like a plan with the person that, like for this example, with his wife, set out a plan. So what's the budget like? What are the finances like right now? How can they plan for this? And this is trivial times. It's very trying, but unfortunately, I think in terms of this dynamic, the best thing to do is to just have an open, honest conversation. It's not an easy conversation, but to be able to really work through it step by step. And often this process is a difficult one because we often don't want to work through things step by step. We generally are individuals who like to jump to things, jump to conclusions, jump to a solution. But in order to get to a holistic, good solution, you need to work through things one by one, slowly, patiently, be patient with your partner. But absolutely, will I not put my voice and say, be patient with any type of physical abuse. We do not condone that in any capacity. So that's something, I think there's some issues there that are deeper than what's presented.
Definitely. I think this really hits home, especially because during this COVID-19 pandemic and right now in the world that we live in, especially in America, over 22 million Americans have already filed for unemployment. So this is a really real issue. And I'm sure financial topics at home is something that's going to be coming up a lot. So thank you for that, Sahar. Subhaan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just piggybacking off Sahar, I think open communication is very, very, very important. Of course, in no way would we condone any type of physical violence and things of that sort. But if it's more from a financial point of view, then I think having that notion with communication that both spouses or both the couples are a team. I think ensuring that we are a team, we're going to get through this together, and focusing on the blessings that they both have, which is shelter, water, food, which we all have. And sometimes we don't think about that, especially during a time like this. I think gratitude would definitely be something that could really help be that catalyst, if you will, of that communication. So really open communicating and solving it together as a team.
Definitely.
So yeah, I think there needs to be zero tolerance for any kind of abuse or violence in the home, and you know, it's not uncommon when someone feels disempowered, like losing a job, that they feel the need to exercise power and control at home, which is what violence is all about. And so again, it goes back to how do we empower ourselves as a relationship? How do we tap into resources? Sahar made a good point earlier. You have a lot of families that don't have insurance. All the local health departments in the counties, DuPage County Health Department, Cook County Health Department, they have a list of resources for families, financial resources and mental health resources to help families through this difficult time. And we need to access these now that they're out there.
Definitely. Would any of you guys have tips on how to have that communication, how to have that conversation when it comes to financial struggles in your family? Any insights there?
Well, I could talk about, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Finances is one of those subjects that a lot of couples avoid. I've worked with, in my practice, couples will come in, they've been married for 10 years and they've never talked about money before. They don't know how much the other person makes. They don't know how much each person has saved. They just like split up their bills and they're doing their own thing. But it's also one of the categories that could create the most amount of distrust in a relationship. So one of the things I recommend to couples is you need to put it all on the table, meaning say, you know, sit down and say, okay, this is gonna be difficult, but we're going to talk about this. And what are my expectations? Not that it has to be like this. Here's how I figured or thought our finances should be planned or managed in our relationship. And then you come to the table with your perspective. And then let's see if we can come to middle ground on this, because usually somebody's avoiding it because of some kind of old wound or trauma. They saw their parents arguing about finances growing up, or, you know, they were poor growing up, or, you know, their dad had a lot of money but wouldn't spend it, whatever it is. And so we've got to move past that discomfort, like Sahar said earlier, and just realize that, you know, there's not really anything to be afraid of, and that I can only have control over myself. And if I manage my emotions and I'm willing to be uncomfortable for a little bit, you'll see that the comfort comes at the end of it.
Definitely. Thank you for the insights. Anyone else have any insights on communication?
I do want to add some info in relation to everything we're discussing with this case. I think that power dynamics plays a huge role in this. There's, like we see with domestic violence, there's a power and control situation where one partner is controlling, holds more power. And so I think it's a really good question to assess if this is that. And we know that domestic violence comes in many shapes and forms: psychological, emotional, not just solely limited to physical. And so I think in this scenario, I also want to touch on community support. So we want folks to know, like, do not think that you are stuck in this dynamic, that you have to fight this battle alone, if you will. There are community organizations out there who are doing great work, are doing grassroots work. I know the agency that I work for, prior to not working for them, I didn't know that these things existed, and that I met other organizations that are doing such amazing work. Right now, AFS is for families facing financial hardship. We're giving out food throughout this pandemic. We're hot meals, we have amazing donors. We are giving out food. We have, like, for any faith-based individuals, we have Ramadan drives, and we offer food for them. And so just know that there's support out there. Don't be scared to ask for it. Sometimes I think we need to let the pride go a little bit and be able to lean on somebody else. And so if we don't have community, who do we have? And so I think that's an important part that I really want to touch on as well. And if anybody tuning in or chiming in is facing any form of domestic violence, I do want to put it out there. We do have a domestic violence 24-hour hotline, or really, it's a crisis management. So if you feel like you are in a dynamic where you just can't take it, whether it be physical abuse, psychological abuse, emotional, or just really going through crisis and you feel like you need that help, there are free resources out there. And I want to stress this out. A lot of places, a lot of organizations will give you that help with no charge. And that's the good thing about community. The hotline number is 708-945-7600. Again, that's 708-945-7600. If this dynamic applies to you, if you're listening in and you feel like, hey, I really resonate with this. I don't feel well. I'm really stressed out. I don't feel safe in any capacity. Please, I urge you to call. You can call anonymously. You don't have to disclose who you are, but there are folks out there. There are organizations out there, such as our organization, doing this work and providing that support for folks. So yeah, I think that's another avenue I want to touch on is community support.
Definitely. Someone just asked a question about if they should stay in a violent situation. What's a suggestion for that? And I think you touched on that beautifully. Were there any other suggestions for that?
I could just say one thing. I would say along with communal support, I think another element of that is also spiritual support as well. So I had the opportunity to work at a mosque for a couple of years, and I was shocked to see that all these various scenarios, they're happening in our own communities. And our amazing spiritual leaders, they are dealing with this and they're talking to the community and they're talking to people who are going through this. So if you are going through something like this, with all the various means that we have, another mean is also just reaching out to your local imam and just reaching out and getting some advice. Don't underestimate that they deal with this. Don't think, oh, they don't know what I'm going through. No, they do. Reach out to them, and I promise you it'll be a source of benefit, inshallah.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Subhaan. That was great. So let's hop into scenario 4. Leaving for college was the best thing that ever happened to me this past fall. I could finally be on my own, away from the bubble I grew up in. All of a sudden, I'm thrust back into my toxic home situation where my parents' anger issues reign supreme. They get upset at me and my siblings for the smallest of issues and blow things out of proportion. Our conversations are almost always filled with disagreement. What do I do? Anyone want to take the lead here?
I can start. So kind of going back to, I found that there's some categories of or groups of demographics of individuals or people that are struggling most with this pandemic, the isolation, I should say. And one of them is young adults, teenagers, young adults. So really we're talking about like 15 to 21. And because that age is characterized by a newfound freedom and independence that they hadn't had up until that point. And so that means they could go, and especially college, right? It's always challenging for college students to come back home, even for the summer. And also the parents are like, no, you can't stay out till 1 a.m. What are you talking about? And so there's always that conflict already with college students. But I've been joking around saying like all these college students and teenagers feel like they're grounded for 2 months for no good reason. Because again, going back to their coping mechanisms, but just their freedom that's been taken away. So this is probably happening. You talk a lot of college students, they're feeling very depressed and isolated and alone. And compound that with the fact that this generation, it's really interesting. I don't want to generalize, but a lot of social media and how they used it was to show people what they were doing. And now they're not doing anything. So there's not really that communication back and forth with social media. So I've been having to tell my clients, you need to reach out to your peers. You need to call them. You need to FaceTime them and interact with them, because we take for granted all those little social interactions that we have in a given day with our friends that make us laugh. They kind of relieve some of our stress of classes, of tests, and these kind of things. And so it is always challenging when you come back to a family situation that you're trying to escape. I know a lot of times I work with teenagers in high school and I say, well, when you go to college, then you can manage how often you're around that. You could go visit your parents, and if it gets out of hand, you could go and come back. But again, it's that feeling of being trapped that makes it so unbearable. And it goes back to the other things, trying to brainstorm and find ways to cope with that, new ways that you weren't using before. Revisit music that you did before, but also you can get out of the house as well in ways where you're still social distancing. Some people, just be creative with that.
That's actually really interesting. I really resonate with what you said. As a college student myself, I haven't been using social media as much anymore as before the quarantine. And I've been FaceTiming a lot more, as you said, doing Zoom calls a lot more, and just trying to connect with people instead of texting them, instead of posting something I'm doing, because we're all in quarantine. We're all doing the same thing for the most part, right? So I really resonate with what you said, Edmund. Sahar or Subhaan, do you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, just going off of what you guys said, and Jamaal, I totally feel you. I was just in college a couple of years ago, and this is something that's so common, especially now. It's definitely happening. I would say just what both of you guys were saying, just trying to find a way to kind of cope with some of this stuff, right? So sometimes, parents out of love, they may get mad, or sometimes they actually do get mad. But if you fire back, it's just going to keep on making the fire bigger. So maybe finding some ways like going outside, getting a walk, and just kind of exhibiting patience. With Ramadan coming next week, it'll be a great opportunity to do that. And then on the second end, try to do something that you normally don't do. Like try to go outside of your comfort zone, right? With your family. And I know it may sound weird to a lot of people, but maybe once just watch a movie with the family, or just play a game, like play a game of cards or something. Just have some fun with them. And you'll be shocked to see how little they fire back in the future, right? By just spending some quality time with them and doing something that they're like, whoa, we never do this. They'll have fun, you'll have fun. And in the future, inshallah, you'll also see like this was so worth it. And you want to do it more too.
Definitely. Sahar?
Yeah, I as well, like all of you, resonated with all this. Being in grad school myself, I feel like I've been in the education system for a while now. And I think when we heard of quarantining happening and then all of these in-shelter regulations being put in place, the first thing that went through my mind was for a lot of immigrant and refugee students, a lot of folks who don't have the healthiest homes, and what would they go home to? Are they safe? And so you would be surprised how many folks you meet might not disclose or look like they have everything healthy, but in reality are truly struggling and living in very emotionally, mentally abusive homes, and it's very detrimental to our youth in the community, our young adults. And so I really challenge for those of you who feel like you're really isolated and feel like you don't have anybody, and if you feel like you're resonating with a lot of what we're talking about, and you feel like you're stuck, and you feel like you live in a household where truly there's a lot of toxicity going on and just abuse, please, I challenge you to build that community network, build that community support. You'd be surprised how many people out there are willing to listen. And I think that's something we take for granted, is the ability to holistically listen to folks. Sometimes that's all someone needs, is to be able to, for them to feel heard and to validate a lot of their struggles that they're going through. And I also see a lot of folks who they are abroad for college and they come home, and there is a huge age gap between them and their parents. And it comes off as, my mother and my father are just really, really like abusive. In reality is, often we see it with a lot of ethnic and cultural minority families, is especially where their child is younger and the family, mom and dad, are older. There's like especially in the age of technology, there's a lacking of understanding. Mom and dad aren't really in tune with things, with what the child's in, with this whole Snapchat, Instagram game scenario, if you will. And so it's like they don't get it. And I think also, when we talk about culture, we talk about being very, very sheltered. And we see a lot of young youth and adolescents really just sheltered by their family. And often that's mistaken for being held down or feeling like they're trapped. So it's important to understand the role that this plays on families. And so either way, either aspect, either end of the rope, if you feel like you are isolated, if you feel like you don't have that support, just know you can create that. It's difficult, but you definitely can create that network, that support circle, if you will. Find your people. build your circle, have someone you could lean on. And I think that often when we act like we're strong and we have it all figured out and I can do this on my own, well, that's great to, believe in yourself, but I also believe that leaves us with such a heavy burden that no person should have to go through. You shouldn't have to go through anything alone, especially in isolation, with family that you may or may not feel like you are in an unhealthy, toxic dynamic. Whether you have communal support, we call it chosen family, you choose someone that you can talk to. These are all things that I think feed the soul and feed your needs that maybe aren't being met at home. And so hopefully, inshallah, this whole situation will all soon be resolved, and all the students that are here, that are home, can hopefully go back to campus. But it's definitely a very disheartening situation. And it's difficult to see how this impacted a lot of folks who had to come back home because of this.
Definitely. I also want to iterate that there may be a lot of undocumented immigrants or undocumented people that are fearful of seeking out counseling because they fear they might get caught or something like that. I also want to iterate and remind them that you actually won't be reported due to confidentiality laws. So definitely pursue counseling if that's something that's on your mind. You don't have to fear for that.
And I also want to add, for if there's anybody listening on this topic that is undocumented, that is a DACA recipient, and you find yourself stressing about worrying if you're going to have to drop out of school, if you're not going to be able to attend the next semester because of the situation and with loans being certain loan companies not funding, there are loans for DACA students out there that will fund you. And if you can't find it, that's not an option. I could put them in the link below, but also there are array amount of scholarships out there, opportunities. So I encourage our community, I encourage our youth to please don't underestimate yourself. Don't underestimate your capabilities. Apply to these scholarships. You have nothing to lose. They're absolutely free to apply to. And at the end of the day, you never know. And especially with being a DACA refugee immigrant, that's the last thing I think it's disheartening to see, is to see somebody who's worked so hard in their academic career have to worrying about dropping out and worrying about, all their hard work going to nothing. There are resources out there. There are funders out there. There are donors out there, and there are scholarships out there. Again, I will list some information below if anybody needs it. But I just wanted to throw that in.
Definitely. Cool. So let's go ahead and hop into scenario number 5 for tonight. I have always felt distant from my children since they have been in high school. I felt like they did not view me as an important piece of their lives. They are not home often and are almost always out with their friends. I have caught them with different types of drugs twice before, and I'm afraid that I've lost them. During this quarantine, I want to connect with them on a deeper level than before and rekindle our relationship. What can I do? Edmund, can we start with you on this one?
Sure. Rosecrans, which is a drug treatment facility, mental health treatment facility in the area, Chicago area, they just released something about, on their website, I think it was, I got it on an email, but I received an email that, ways to see, to tell if your child is addicted to a substance during these times. And it gives some guidance on that. And that's the thing, we're getting a lot of really great feedback from some of the attendees of the webinar. So it's just hard to address all these things. Someone mentioned EAPs, which is another great resource. Employee assistance programs. One of my friends, Joy, I'll give a shout out to her. She's a human resource specialist. And, it's really great that we have all these different resources for us. And it's just so hard to list them all, but that's a good start. If someone has a job still, they can pursue that avenue, because those resources sometimes could point you to drug treatment facilities, or it's free counseling usually to the employees for so many sessions. So in this situation, what couple of things I want to talk about, is that teenage years can be definitely very challenging for adults and their teens. And I get a lot of parents that will call me and say, Edmund, I used to think my daughter was the greatest, but over the last 2 years, I feel like I lost the instructions and we can't stand each other. And it's kind of characterized by that, is that conflict between teenagers and parents. And one of the things I say is try not to talk about school as much. because as parents, that is always our primary concern. And you'd be surprised how often people get along with their kids in the summer, and then the school year starts and there's all this conflict. So one of the things I always try to do, and I always recommend for parents to do, is tell them stories about yourself. Because when you're coming around the corner and you start asking them questions, they're wondering, like, what are you trying to find out about me not doing? How am I going to let you down right here if I say the wrong thing? So they don't want to give a whole lot of information. So just tell them stories about yourself, tell them stories about what you're thinking, share your thoughts, and then really try to listen to their response before you even say anything. Let them don't be uncomfortable with silence. After you ask them a question, just kind of sit there for a few seconds and see what they have to say. Sometimes they wait, they don't say anything right away because they know you're going to interrupt it and just talk more. So they just kind of sit there. So those are a couple ways that you can connect with them, but also have that conversation just like you would with your spouse. Like, we're all in this together. We may be here for another 4 weeks. Let's make the best of it. And I found that some families actually have really come closer during this. Especially if you don't have little ones, the little ones make it a little hard. They're loving it, but the parents aren't loving it so much.
Awesome. Sahar?
Yeah, this is a real one. When I work at the mosque, I would get calls like this all the time. Parents finding out their kids drinking, doing drugs, all that. Very, very tough. But there is light on the other side of the tunnel. For me, what I've seen that helped a lot of parents, and I'm also thinking of this from a child's perspective as well, from a parent, is parents ensuring that they relate to the kids, right? So that they actually, instead of scolding them right away and yelling at them and just saying things to them that are just going to push them more away, actually just spending some time with them, listening to them, and not getting to that thing that they want to know about and talk about right away. It's a long-term game. Spend time with them, develop interest in them, be their friend, just be their friend. And lo and behold, you'll see that the child will eventually start to be more open to a point where they'll know that you are the parent and you are the one who's always going to be there for me at the end of the day. I need to vent. So be a friend, and inshallah, you'll see that they'll really vent to you eventually, inshallah. But be a friend, be there for them, and don't go straight to the scolding.
Yeah, definitely. Subhaan, something that you said resonated with me. The entire be a friend thing. As a kid living in a household with two parents, alhamdulillah, the best thing that has happened to me is that my parents have become my friend in that sense. They've been able to open up to me, and I found out the biggest thing is that my life isn't different from theirs. They didn't have a different life than me. They also went to school. They also had friend issues. They also had issues in their life. They also had drama. They also had things that didn't go their way. They also didn't do well in classes. Like, they relate to you a lot, even though they may not show it at times. They relate to you a lot. So being able to relate and know that they were in that situation before, and the things that they're doing and the way that they're guiding you is for a reason, so they can help you, so you don't have to go through that again. I think that's something really important to realize. Sahar?
Yeah, I definitely resonate with everything you all are saying. I think when it comes to parentship, we see it in our community. Our youth are engaging in experimenting with alcohol and drugs. And while that's never, I believe any parent would ever, in their wildest dreams or wishes, want to know that their child is prone to these things or are surrounded by people who are maybe tempting them to try these things. The reality is it is happening. And so acknowledging this reality and working through it, we see from the statistics, fear-based behavioral models and models of discipline, it never works. You only drive the child farther. And so like you all said with scolding, I think it's important to have very rigid, good boundaries with your children. And so not to say, yeah, it's okay, mistake, and it's cool. And the behavior repeats again. It's important to almost be that peer mentorship, if you will, with your child. So really, truly show them how this is wrong, show them how this is harmful, but at the same time, let them know that you love them, irrespective of this decision, but that it won't be tolerated, and that it can be very harmful for them. I think it's important to work through these steps with love and with care, because we don't want to see a regression. We don't want to see, I've seen in many family with clients where the child just rebelled even more because they felt like they were selfless and worthless, and because the parent had either directly or not so directly implied that you're with terminology like loser, or terminology like failure, druggy, alcohol, all of these things that are very, very hurtful. And so we see that cognitively the child starts to believe, yeah, I am this and I am that, and I'm not loved and no one cares for me. And so it becomes a pattern. And so we don't want that to happen. So again, with intervention, the earlier we intervene, the better work we can do. And that doesn't have to be some fancy terminology. It could be, like you all said, as simple as really having a sit down, being that friend, like you all stated on for your child, but with boundaries. And it's not an easy conversation to have, but it's also not a difficult step to do. I think in our community, we see a lack of mentorship, but there are also folks who are doing that mentorship on the contrary. So if you feel like, I just can't, I don't have the resources, I don't have the patience, I just want to, shake my kid, this is so wrong, I can't tolerate it. Please don't. Please know that there are community organizations out there that you can get your child into counseling. There are folks who non-judgmental, confidential scenarios where you could get them that help. Don't feel like this is something that you have to tackle on alone, and especially for single parents. I think this is, we talk about parents, but ideally we also see in our community divorce, and we see that a lot of folks are single parents. And so we want you to know that this is not something that you have to go through alone, that we do want to support you. We are here for you and your child. There's no shame involved. Counseling, everything is confidential. So just please, again, with community support, please seek it out if you feel like this is something that you can't take on. Because ideally we don't want to lose someone to any of these aspects. We want to be able to help them and let them know that the experience that you had doesn't define you. And so while we don't condone the practices, but at the same time, it's not who this individual is. If your son experimented with something or has a group of friends that aren't necessarily friends that you believe are the healthiest, we'll work through it. It's not as easy as it may sound, but we will work through it. It's not a dead end, if you will.
Definitely. Thank you for that. So right now it is 6:55 and we have the end time set for 7 p.m. I do know people do have to go at 7. However, we're going to keep going about 15 minutes past the end time because we have a bunch of questions from you guys that we definitely don't want to ignore and we do want to unpack. There will be a recording of this sent out, so hopefully you guys can catch that at a separate time if you can't stay past 7. So we actually had a question from the audience, and whoever wants to answer it, feel free. What if I wanted to help out one of my university friends who is also struggling with drug abuse, but I also don't want to push him away and be judgmental? What can I do to be there for him and help guide him through this tough time?
Well, drug abuse, drug addiction is a difficult thing. I think one of the things that we have to remember is that if we address it as an illness, like the disease model, and not a moral judgment, right? Once somebody gets addicted to a drug, or whether it's physiologically or psychologically, it's no longer a decision they're making every day. It's actually become a need for them. And so if we understand it from that perspective, and we just continue to send that message of care and concern, kind of like Sahar was talking about, then we don't have to, it's not about judgment. It's just continue to say, I'm worried about you. It's a problem. I want you to get help. Here are some places you can go to get help. And there are places like Rosecrans that offer people who can't afford, who don't have insurance, they provide services as well. So there are services out there for just about everything, as long as we're willing to look for them. And right now, because of this crisis, one of the positive things that's coming out of it is all of these lists are coming up of services that are available to provide support to people in every kind of scenario. And so we need to try to take advantage of those.
Definitely. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Or else we can hop into the next one.
I did. I do want to state that, like, I believe it's refreshing to hear that there are folks out there who genuinely wanted to have that proactive stance with their friend, because if you're a friend, you want to be able to not turn a blind eye. I think that quality of care is something, and vulnerability to want to step in and want to look out for your friend as if they are your own sibling, like your own family, is something so underrated and so valued. And caring is not out of style. It's definitely something that has always been in. but also I want to be very, like, I want to emphasize boundaries. So speaking for myself, I've learned this, that often we want to be the helper. But we're often also the wounded helper, or the wounded healer. And so we want to help, we want to intervene, we want to do this and that. And relating to this dynamic, I think we don't see ourselves as the hero, but we're often have this vigil of like the heroic friend. We're going to save our friend. We want to save them. And so it's important to realize the correlation of burnout. So how much can you take on, to assess what you're getting yourself into, and also be very cautious to not overstep your boundaries with the person. So unintentionally, your care can violate somebody's boundaries. And I've learned that along the way. And so you don't want to lose your friend because they feel violated by you, because they feel like you know what's best for them. And like, I want to share my voice to Edmund. There are services out there to refer your friend to, or to maybe seek out knowledge about what they're going through. I think the best thing you can do is to educate yourself with technology these days. There's YouTube, there's a bunch of good resources online that you could kind of read up about how to help someone who's dealing with it. But when we talk about substance abuse and like this scenario, please don't take on the fact that you may know it all and that you're going to help this person sober up or recover or heal. There are professionals out, you don't want to do harm. So there are professionals out there who do this work, who specialize in this. I know at our organization, one of the therapists, Saleh, he is certified in substance abuse intervention. And so he actually specifically in our agency, his role as a mental health therapist, licensed therapist, he does substance abuse. He works with individuals who are struggling with it. And so turning a blind eye to it and saying we don't have this in our community only does more harm, just like any other community. Not to put our community down. We do face these things. We're not perfect. And so peel off the layer of judgment, peel off the layer of shame. I think really speaking directly to this college student who wants to help their friend out, please seek out sources. And that's the only advice I can give, is to seek out sources for your friend. Because you don't want to do more harm, even though it's so well-intentioned, even though there's so much pure care there. But at the end of the day, you don't want to push your friend away, further away. You don't want to violate them. And you also don't want to give false information or try to heal or save the person when there's someone out there, a professional out there who could do this work and truly help your friend. And lastly, I do want to note that that does not inclined to stop being the person's friend if the person seeked out professional help, that they're taken care of. It's important to still be that friend, to still be that shoulder, if you will, to check in. I think we started off this panel with saying check in with your community, check in with your people. So consistently check in. And I think we often celebrate resiliency, but I also want to be able to emphasize celebrating someone who might not feel their best. So it's okay if they don't feel well. It's okay if they feel like some days in their sobriety or in their healing that, you know, they've made a regression. They don't feel like they're progressing at all. That's as important to focus on with people in our community. I don't know if that made sense.
That made perfect sense. Thank you so much, Sahar. I really relate with the part where you said to be their friend and to stay their friend, stay as their rock, be there for them when no one else will. I think that's really important. So another question that we had is, how can I make my parents less frustrated during a time like this? They're concerned about not having money, and at times they put their anger out on me.
I feel like we've kind of addressed this earlier with the angry parents and the college student coming back home. And that, you know, it's different. It depends. I don't know how old the person is that wrote that. I know some of the older people in our community are struggling with the lack of independence as well, and the lack of freedom, especially retired couples. But and to a certain extent, not necessarily listening to the social distancing suggestions that are being made. So, but definitely, I mean, the finances. I think, I don't know. I don't want to repeat myself because we all kind of talked about the finances already, and the challenges with parents who are angry. I mean, trying to connect, trying to find ways to connect, try to find ways for everybody to do things that are healthy, encouraging both of them to do things that are healthy for them to manage their stress. You know, one of the things that I wanted to mention, just kind of like it weaves into all of these things, and Sahar started to touch on it a little bit. And that is that you have a lot of people who are experiencing mental health challenges, sadness, isolation, depression, anxiety. And what I'm finding is very quickly after that feeling or thought, another thought comes rushing in, and it's covered with guilt and shame. I shouldn't feel this way because I have a comfortable house and all the meals that I need. Or there are people that are living in tents and having to deal with this, and I shouldn't feel this way. So there's this judgment on themselves that people are piling on to these already challenging times, which is totally unnecessary. We need to give ourselves a break. It's all relative. Yeah, there's always somebody that has it harder than us. You can always apply that rule. So we got to allow ourselves to feel where we're at, recognize that, and understand that we have the power in a lot of cases to do something to change that. Dr. Mark Brackett from Yale University talks a lot about just understanding your emotions, understanding where you are, growing your emotional vocabulary. He has this thing called a mood meter. You could look it up all over the internet. And it has all these words that could describe how you're feeling. Because a lot of times there's that, what's that movie called? Up, or I don't know if it's not Up, another movie with emotions. And there's only like 5 emotions. But our emotions are so much more complicated and broader than that. And so for us to be able to identify how we're feeling, maybe talk with somebody else, talk through that, and try our darndest inside out. Try our darndest not to pile on guilt and shame as if I shouldn't feel this way. I remember one of the times, right when this started, people were like, "Oh yeah, during a pandemic, the last time somebody wrote this great book," and it's like, okay, let's see what I can get done. I feel busier now than I was before the pandemic, so I'm like, I don't have any extra time to do things and learn something new. So, but again, there's that creeping voice that will say, "Oh, you should have done this much. You had all this time. You should have done this." But it's not really like that. It's really about, yeah, maybe I could have, but let's give ourselves a break. This is difficult for a lot of people, and not judge ourselves for what we're not getting done, but just trying to stay productive and listen to all the things that everybody's saying on this panel today.
Definitely. I also wanted to go ahead and kind of talk about emotional abuse. I want to get your guys' insight on emotional abuse. And we have a question specifically tied to it. Someone asked, how do I start a discussion with my spouse after I've been verbally wounded by him? I want to have a productive discussion without brutality, especially since we are stuck inside together. Also, we are not normally together due to our work circumstances. He travels frequently 4 days a week for work, and I work with a heavy workload that makes me out of the house when he is at home and not working.
So it sounds like, I mean, to start, I heard terminology like wounded. So she's identifying with feeling wounded verbally. And so that's definitely a strong emotion. She's hurt, very simplified, deeply hurt by this dynamic. And I think it sounds like a work-life balance issue. And we see that a lot with families and couples, especially working couples who are both working. There's a lot of stress and tension there. And so the best, I think, solution I could give to this is for folks to really assess their communication. And this ties into, I think, a scenario we talked about early on in this panel is that transparency. So, let your partner know on days you're not feeling your best that you're not, rather than having this high tension going in and you both picking at it, going off on each other for something that could be so easily talked through. Giving grace to yourself. So give yourself the same grace that you expect from others or that you so freely give to others. I think that's something that also we undermine. So, but if she's very verbally wounded, I think she needs to express to him how the ways in which he did hurt her. And hopefully on the other end, he's willing to respect that and listen to how he wounded her and correct that action. And so on the other end, it's as important as well that he's receptive, that he's unconditionally listening and willing to work on it, because it takes two. We can't have one-sided relationships and expect them to work. If one person's putting in all the effort and all the work, it's like talking to a wall, and it's almost very hard to find solutions. And we often see that person's hurting themselves over and over again. It's like a cycle of, and it's domestic violence. So emotional, mental, are all underlying of factors of domestic violence. So it's important to recognize it when it's felt. And if it's not something that it can be worked through, if the other partner isn't willing to do the correctional work, definitely then that's a different dialogue and a different conversation to have with her.
Great. Subhaan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I saw a beautiful comment on the chat just saying, do they pray together? That of course is a great way to really just declutter away from what's going on and just get that spiritual attachment. But as Sahar was saying, it's very important that it takes two. And I'm sure very often we see, although a spouse feels something, he or she keeps it in and doesn't say anything. It just keeps on taking it in to a point where they let it all out. Whereas if the other spouse just knew that from the start, he or she would feel really, really sad and would try to resolve that. So as Sahar was saying, it takes two and open communication. When you are not feeling your best, when you're going through something, it's very, very important to just say it, mean it. And we hope that the other spouse would then, of course, be receptive to that. But I think, as the comment mentioned by Iman, I think praying together is a great one. With Ramadan coming in just a week, it's a great opportunity to do stuff like that. It's a great opportunity. We see so many webinars, but there's going to be so many spiritual YouTube videos that are coming out on a weekly basis, daily basis. It's a great way to really just kind of sync and inshallah just grow that relationship. But going back, open communication, it's really, really important.
I could just add one last thing to that. Dr. Gottman talks about, he's one of the biggest researchers in marriage right now in our country. And he talks about softening your startup. So basically what he's saying is the very first words that come out of your mouth largely determine how that conversation is going to go. So if you start a conversation with your spouse by saying, we really need to talk, it's probably not going to go very well. And so we need, hey, do you have a minute to talk? I wanted to talk about something if you're available. Something like that. And then you start off with the first sentence in that conversation when they actually come to you by saying something like, I really appreciate all this time that we've had together, with a positive sentence before you go on the complaint, train. So that's a little tip that can really go a long way.
Definitely.
Something to throw in too, since you mentioned that Dr. Gottman, who any psych folks on this tuning in with us, he does great work with couples and family. And so the first step, he says, in family therapy is to disarm, if you will, like a fire alarm, if you try to visualize it. So disarm any type of rigidness or barriers that you put before you go in and try to hold this dialogue. And so I use the term hold. I use the term hold because you are literally holding the space when you're talking with your partner. You're not going into a battlefield. You're not going in. You remove the layers of barriers. That's as simplified as I can get. And anyone interested in reading up on his work, he does phenomenal work with family systems and family therapy. And I follow his work all throughout my career and academic career as well. And just has done phenomenal work in the literature with models about how to truly effectively work through these areas and these issues that we're talking about right now. So like I was saying earlier, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of information out there. If you can't seek it, if you don't want to seek someone to kind of decompress a lot of the baggage or that you feel like you're carrying, you can always Google these things. There's really cheap books out there you can get from like thrift store or Amazon for really, really low prices, or even just Googling his work, reading through there's a lot of ebooks out there that may or may not help you depending on the area that you're searching for in terms of couples therapy. But yeah, he's someone that I did want to know as well, Dr. Gottman.
Awesome. So we're going to have one final question. You guys have been asking some amazing questions. I want to thank the panelists for all their insights, and you guys for asking some amazing questions. But due to time, we're going to have one final question, then we're going to start wrapping up. So the final question is, the fuel that's needed to support others is our love for others. However, we only have so much love to give. What's the best way to increase this fuel?
I can start with that. That's definitely something that I'm sure all of us are going through. And I guess from a faith perspective, there's a verse that I'm sure all of us have heard, many of us have heard, and that's with hardship comes ease. Now, many of us think when we hear that verse, with hardship comes ease, we have to go through the hardship first, and then the ease will come after. But it's actually with that hardship that we may be going through, the ease is there as well. So that fuel is gratitude. And by simply just spending maybe 5 minutes away from all the clutter, away from everything that's going on, away from this device, and just focusing on all the blessings you have, and there's so many, you'll start to realize how many blessings you have. You'll start to get your fuel ignited. And that'll be able to not only give yourself care, but it'll also be able to give others you know care as well.
This is a great question to end with, I think, because as therapists or people in the helping community, we have to focus on this all the time. It's called self-care, and it's got all these terms to it. And self-care has become kind of a common word or phrase that people are using now. So really, I really like Subhaan talking about shukr, gratitude. There's a lot of research that talks about keeping a gratitude journal and how it actually can impact your happiness and can change your brain. And so really trying to, where we start, and you get better at it, the more you do it, like Subhaan was saying, the more you do it, the more I do this activity where I have people, from the alphabet A to Z, think of something you're grateful for with each letter. And some people really struggle with that. They're sitting there thinking for like 5 minutes. I can't even think of it. But the more you do it, the better you can start just air, apples. You could just come up with so many things that are just simple, but that's really what it's about. It's just identifying the simple things in the world that you're grateful for, because it really does rejuvenate you. And the same thing with your spouse. Gottman talks about this. I remind couples all the time. Remind yourself of your spouse's positive qualities, because by our nature, we see things that are wrong with them or that we don't like, but really most of them are just different. They're not deficiencies, they're different than us. And so we don't understand it, so we label it as wrong. Another book out there that I'd recommend is Love Languages. There's Love Languages for teens, Love Languages for your spouse, the 5 love languages it's called. And it really can give you some insight to maybe why you're not connecting with your teenager or your spouse. Because sometimes we're trying in the way that we want to feel loved, but it's missing the mark and we get really frustrated. But if we just tweak that a little bit and try in the way that they need it, you can see a huge difference in that it's actually making an impact.
Awesome. I want to thank you all so much on the panel for an amazing discussion, being really engaging and a fruitful discussion as well. And I want to thank all of you for viewing here tonight. We did go a little bit over time, but I think it was worth it. And I think we addressed some amazing points. That being said, I want to quickly remind you guys that we'll be having our next live webinar on April 30th at 6 p.m. inshallah, covering addiction and mental health during Ramadan. So make sure to block that time off on your calendar, and we hope to see you there. Let me hand it over to Chris from the coalition to make a few words.
All right. Assalamu alaikum. Just first off, thank you so much to all the panelists and Jamaal for moderating. MashaAllah. There was a lot of great information that all of you shared and great insight. But I'm just going to take a minute or two to talk really quickly about the census. So I'm Chris. I am a census fellow for the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition and a student at UIC. But as a coalition, what we're working towards is making sure that every single person in Illinois is counted in the 2020 census. It is super crucial to deciding all of the resources and access that we have to those resources and funds from the federal government for the next 10 years. And because of these unprecedented times, the US Census Bureau has extended the deadline to fill out the census through September and into October 15th. And so that means that you have from now until October to fill out your 2020 census, but obviously the quicker that you fill it out and get it out of the way, the easier it is. So it's a simple 9 question survey, and it takes 5 minutes. And here's some information that will also be going to all of the attendees in their email. And then if we could just go to the next slide. Thank you. All right. And then this is, as a coalition, we are also, we created an initiative called Care Coalition. And so we serve as a connector between those that can give care and those that are in need of care, whether that be grocery deliveries or groceries, any financial assistance, access to literally anything that anybody could ever think of. we do our very absolute best to connect individuals. And so here is the flyer with the hotline, which is 24/7, and then the bit.ly link, which you could also use and fill out a Google form, and then we'll be able to contact you. We have plenty of people requesting assistance, and also, alhamdulillah, a lot of volunteers. But obviously, the more the merrier, and the more volunteers, the more people will be able to assist, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much once again. Again, everyone part of Project Taqwa, the coalition, all of our partners. We want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. Inshallah, we hope to see you guys on April 30th for our next webinar. And again, here are some resources that are available. But with this, I just want to say, Assalamu alaikum. It's been a pleasure.